Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. Finding Her Fiancé. Chapter 1. Smiling, Ella wrapped the young cowboy's purchases, a shirt, 2 pairs of socks and a box of shells for the gun at his hip, in brown paper. "Thank you, and please come again." Tipping his hat, the cowboy picked up the bundle as he nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Much obliged." Cowboys certainly have manners, Ella thought. When comparing them to the young men she knew back home in Alabama, she gave the cowboys who came into the store top honors for how they treated people, especially women. Not that Alabama boys were rude, it was simply that the men in Wyoming offered folks a greater courtesy. They appeared to have a dog need to be polite. Ella watched him go, the bell tinkling merrily as he walked outside and shut the door behind him. Unable to suppress a sigh, she leaned her elbow on the counter, put her chin on her hand, and daydreamed about the day when she might have a cowboy of her own. Her intended husband-to-be, Dan Ellison, was one such man who made a living raising and herding cattle. Currently driving a herd from Wyoming to the markets in Denver, Dan should have been back in Plum River the week before. Ella had arrived with her best friend Roxy more than 2 months ago, expecting to be married quickly. Now only Roxy was married, and Ella lived with her and her husband, Curtis. The door's bell resonated again. She glanced up to find Roxy's husband, who was also her employer, walking in. She offered him a quick smile. Curtis Luna, owner and proprietor of Luna Mercantile and Dry Goods, shook his head and grimaced as he caught Ella's eye. Young and good-looking with shaggy red-gold hair and laughing hazel eyes, Curtis had been the area's most eligible bachelor until Roxy Mills had snagged his heart. They had married within the month, and they still behaved like gushing newlyweds. Curtis gave Ella a quick peck on the cheek as he walked around the corner of the counter. "No word, then?" Ella asked, not lifting her chin from her fist. "Sorry, little sister," he answered. "Everyone says Dan should have been back by now, but no one seems to know why he ain't." Ella had no idea why Curtis took to calling her little sister. She and Roxy were not related, although it often seemed as though they should have been, as close as they were. "Maybe it's for the best," she said softly. Curtis pulled his merchant's apron over his neck and tied the strings behind his back, eyeing her askance. "Why would you say that?" "I've been waiting and waiting," she grumbled. "I'm weary of it. I want marriage and children. You know I love my dear Martin with all my heart, and if he hadn't died, I'd have a passel of children by now." She paused, trying to find the right words. "I miss him every day. We should have had a long life together, babies and then grandbabies. Is it too much to want that with another man? Is it too much to want happiness again?" "Of course, it's not. You're still young, Ella," Curtis assured her. "Faw. I'm becoming an old spinster. Or an old widow." He laughed. "You are hardly a spinster." Ella chuckled, thought her mood remained cloudy. "Well, perhaps not. But I'm wasting my life, and I'm interfering with yours and Roxy's." He patted her shoulder. "You certainly are not interfering. We love having you with us. Besides, it's your cheery smile that keeps bringing customers in here. I should give you a raise in your salary." "Thanks, but please don't. You give me free room and board on top of what you pay me to work. I can't ask for any more." "Believe me, you're earning your keep," he said, turning to stare up at the tall shelves behind the counter. He set his hands on his hips, frowning at her. "Did you stack those bolts of cloth up there?" "Of course, I did. They needed to be put away. Didn't I tell you that ladder is too unstable for you to climb? I stock the high shelves." Ella waved her hand, dismissing his concern. "You worry too much. Roxy will have my head for a lamp should you get hurt in here. And then your hide for a lampshade?" Ella asked, grinning. That I'd like to see. Women. He snorted. A man is supposed to have only one female giving him trouble. How'd I manage to double that? Blowing him a kiss, Ella caught sight of a familiar female figure walking past the storefront's big window. Straightening, she hurried around the counter just as Mrs. Donovan entered under the musical chime. The first friends she and Roxy made when they first came to Plum River, Mrs. Donovan ran the town's boarding house. Ella reached her and gave her a quick hug. How nice to see you. The griddle you ordered has come in. Ella, lass, how are you? As pretty as ever. So, Mr. Ellison has not yet returned to marry you? No, Ella ran her hands over her skirt, smoothing the folds. I'm beginning to have second thoughts about it all. Perhaps I should get to know someone else. I must say it is rather difficult to marry a man who isn't here, Mrs. Donovan admitted in her Irish brogue. I don't even know him, Ella said, her hands gripping her skirt. I don't want to go back on my word, but I'm finding it harder and harder to want to marry a man I've never met. What if he's not nice to me or even a nice person? Mrs. Donovan took Ella by the shoulders, gazing into her eyes. I understand, lass. But Mr. Ellison is reputed to be an honest, hard-working man. Yet, I myself have met him but a few times, so I cannot vouch for his nature. Men can be rather unpredictable creatures. Why, thanks, Curtis commented dryly from behind the counter. Mrs. Donovan released Ella and offered him a quick nod. I will admit that some arranged marriages are successful, especially Mr. Luna's here. However, as protective over you as I am, Ella, I am inclined to agree that marrying Mr. Ellison might not be in your best interest. I would not see you attached to a man of a less than sterling reputation. So, what shall I do? Carry on with your life, lass. Mrs. Donovan smiled and cupped her cheek. The right man will stumble into it and make you a very happy lady. Meanwhile, I need my griddle. Curtis will fetch it for you. Ella turned to see Curtis roll his eyes. Who runs this place? But he belied his grumble with a quick smile at Ella, then vanished into the back room. Believe me, lass, Mrs. Donovan said, watching the moving curtains Curtis had just gone through. There are men like him in Plum River. Have patience and faith. Chapter 2. The sun had passed its zenith and shone down brightly, yet a faint chill encompassed the light breeze. Autumn had arrived with the Wyoming winter nipping at its heels. Ella wondered how harsh the climate could be out there on the great western plains compared to what she was used to growing up in Alabama. While she looked forward to long winter nights beside a fire in a snug home as the wind howled outside, she also worried. She'd heard stories of deadly blizzards that killed men and cattle indiscriminately. What are you thinking? Roxy asked. Ella glanced over at her. They rode their horses side by side down the hard-packed road, an event they planned every Sunday. With the store closed and church services over for the day, Curtis liked to spend his only free afternoon reading a book on the porch. That gave Roxy and Ella time to ride and talk, the way they used to back home. I'm not thinking of anything in particular, really, Ella answered, gazing out at the tall, golden grasslands. What do you know of the winters here? They can be bad, Roxy admitted. Curtis told me of a winter 5 years back. They found herds of cattle still on their feet, frozen solid. Even the Indians died, trapped in a sea of snow. Oh, my goodness. Now you're scaring me. I got scared myself. Ella gestured toward the distant Tetons and the clouds gathering over them. This country is so beautiful. So hard to imagine it deadly. Look there, antelope. Roxy nodded as the family of pronghorns galloped away from the danger they and their horses presented. We both will have to toughen up. Ella held her right hand up to the sunlight. As long as my skin stays soft. Laughing with Roxy, Ella thought back to their childhood, growing up together as the best of friends. She remembered their long talks of the men they'd marry, the children they'd have, and all their hopes and dreams and futures. Ella knew that without Roxy there in Wyoming with her, she'd have shriveled up with loneliness. With nothing to go home to, and no husband waiting for her in Plum River, she'd have long since succumbed to despair. "I owe you so much," she said, quieting her laughter. "My life." "Don't be ridiculous," Roxy quipped, affection in her eyes. "Without you, I'd be married to that dreadful Sam. My parents wrote me, did I tell you? They said Sam married Harriet and already he's been seen leaving the house of Widow Anders at dawn. Pa fired him as his apprentice." Gasping, Ella covered her mouth with both hands. "No." "Oh, yes. Pa said he refused to have an unfaithful back end of a donkey working for him." As one, Ella and Roxy fell into uncontrollable laughter, their horses stopping when their riders failed to offer any direction. Tears leaking from her eyes, Roxy collapsed onto her saddle horn, trying to catch her breath. Ella's ribs ached. "Oh, Roxy stammered. "But I do feel sorry for Harriet. I do. Ma said she's now quite glad I didn't marry him." Ella wiped her streaming face and picked up her reins. Sam seemed like such a catch, too. So strong-looking and quite sweet. "This just proves you never know a person quite as well as you think you do." Nudging her horse into walking forward once more, Ella asked, "What do you know about Dan Ellison?" "Only what I've heard. He owns a fairly prosperous ranch, which you knew already, and doesn't come to town much. He's hardly ever at Sunday services, never been married, inherited his father's cattle business. As a man, people say he pours his all into the ranch, but mostly they think he's a decent person. I'm not so sure I want to marry him." Roxy eyed her sidelong. "If you're worried about staying with us until he gets back, you can stop. You're more than a sister to me, and I don't want you running off to marry any man to ease your conscience." Ella smiled. "You know me too well. But that's not it. I just feel I should, I guess, know the man first. Like you did. You got to know Curtis rather well and knew you loved him before you married. Maybe I want that experience, too. That's not a bad thing to want, Ella. When Dan returns from his drive, take your time before marrying him. That way you can understand him, decide what's right for you. And if I choose not to marry him after all?" Roxy shrugged. "Then you've made the right choice. You'll know it when you find the right man." Chapter 3. Ella was working hard, ticking off items on Curtis's list of customer orders, writing out the requests for the manufacturers. Curtis liked her to handle this, as he claimed his penmanship tended to confuse those reading it. Ella wrote with a neat and tidy hand, thus eliminating the chance that the manufacturers sent the wrong products. "Another week," she muttered, thinking again of her fiancé. "How long does a cattle drive take?" "Anywhere from a month to 4, a deep voice answered. Ella jumped, startled, so intent on her work, she had failed to hear the front door open and close or the bell's announcement. "Excuse me?" On the far side of the counter, a cowboy stood, his broad-brimmed hat in his hand. Tall, with sandy hair to his collar, his light blue eyes appeared stark against his sun-weathered skin. Like most of the cowboys who came to the store, he wore an open-necked shirt, dark blue pants, and dusty boots. A 6-gun hung in its holster at his hip. "You wanted to know how long a cattle drive takes," he said, his resonant voice wrapped in a southern drawl. "I answered, ma'am." "Well," she said, regaining her composure. "Thank you for the information. What can I do for you?" A sweet, boyish grin surfaced on his face, revealing his teeth, white and even. He's a handsome one, she thought, setting aside the orders. She felt certain that wherever this cowboy went, he left a trail of broken female hearts in his wake. "May I ask why you want to know how long a drive takes?" he asked her. While it really wasn't any of his business, Ella found herself explaining. She liked his smile. "I'm supposed to marry a man who is on a drive to Denver," she said. "It's been almost 3 months now since he left." "Dan Ellison." She jumped again. "How did you know?" "I'm one of his trail hands," he said, extending his hand to her. "I'm Jess Gentry." "Ella Bennett." She shook hands with him. "Dan made no secret of ordering a bride from back east," he said. "I reckon you're her?" She smiled. I reckon I am. Well, ma'am, he is overdue, I'll admit, Mr. Gentry continued. A trip to Denver is no more than a 2-month journey, there and back. Unless some things held him up. Like what? He lifted a broad shoulder. Bad weather most likely. It could be them Indians, or sickness what's causing it. But I aim to find out. What do you mean? If he's not back in 2 days, I'm fixing to ride out and find him. He's done left me in charge of the ranch while he's gone, but them 3 old-timers there can watch over the cows and heifers and the little ones. Ain't much to do, 'cept watch 'em eat. Excitement lit Ella like a torch. Take me with you. Jess Gentry's brows climbed to his hairline. Ma'am? I won't be any trouble, I swear. I can ride a horse, and I don't care if I sleep on the ground. Please let me come. Ma'am, this ain't no bitty camping trip. That's rough country I aim to cross, riding hard. I can keep up. He frowned, and his brows furrowed. What kind of man would I be if I took a pretty lil gal such as yourself into the wilds? A good one. Ella set her hands on her hips. You aren't responsible for me, I can look after myself. Why do you want to go so badly? Dan is my fiancé, she answered. I need to look for him. Jess Gentry cocked his head. By all accounts, you ain't met him. And suddenly, you're his keeper? Call it taking responsibility. I'm not fond of the idea. If you don't agree, Mr. Gentry, I'll just follow you. For a long moment, he stared at her. You're something, ain't you? Ella smiled. I expect you've come here for supplies. What can I get for you? He sighed. 10 pounds of beans, 5 pounds of jerked beef. Chapter 4. Absolutely not. Roxy set hands to hips and scowled. As Ella had expected a fight upon her announcement Jess Gentry had agreed to take her to find Dan and his cowboys, she was neither surprised nor upset. She merely sat behind the store's counter, her chin resting on her fist, idly watching as Roxy raged. What decent man agrees to take a single woman he just met on a cross-country ride? Roxy continued, throwing her arms in the air. It's not something respectable men and women do. Mrs. Donovan says that he has impeccable manners and is a Christian man, Ella said, turning to the boarding house owner. Did you? That I did, lass, Mrs. Donovan replied, her arms folded under her bosom. But I did not say I agree you should accompany him. Roxy is quite right. This ain't something a young woman of good repute does. So, come with us, Roxy, Ella said, straightening. You can be my chaperone. Roxy ceased pacing, but her scowl never wavered. Good idea, Ella. Then he has 2 young women to ravage and murder. Ella laughed. You always did think the worst of people. And you think the devil is an angel. Well, technically, he is. Now, ladies, Curtis said, stepping between the two. Arguing like this solves nothing. Ella, are you sure this is what you want? Yes, Curtis. I can't just sit here worrying over this mess. Not knowing Dan, not knowing if I truly want to marry him. The nervousness alone is making a wreck of me. This way, I can meet him, spend some time with him. Then I'll know one way or the other. Why, I'm not even sure he's still alive. And this Jess Gentry is a good man? Curtis asked Mrs. Donovan. From what I know, she answered. Drinks at the saloon on occasion, but isn't a drunkard. Doesn't gamble, he works hard, is saving much of his pay for his own ranch or so I heard. The land assayer told me he's been making purchases of land in the hills east of the river. See? Ella said. A trustworthy man. We'll be leaving early tomorrow morning. If he murders you and dumps your body in a ravine, don't come crying to me, Roxy commented, her scowl never wavering. Ella laughed and hugged her. I need to pack a few things in my saddlebags. Curtis, I'll need some supplies, too. She pulled a few crumbled bills from her handbag. He waved her money away. I owe you this week's wages. We'll settle it later. What do you need? With her saddlebags bulging, Ella led her saddled horse from the barn just before dawn. Jess gently walked a tall buckskin gelding with 4 white stockings into the yard, leading a laden pack mule by its rope. He tipped his hat to her and Roxy, and shook Curtis's hand. "Mawnin, y'all," he said. "Should be a fine day for travelin'. You'll look after her, Mr. Gentry?" Roxy asked, no sign of her previous anger in her voice. "Yes, ma'am," he replied with an easy smile. "I reckon this ain't exactly a proper thing to do, travelin' with a young miss." But she was stubborn. Always has been. Ella grinned in the near darkness. "I am here, you know." Curtis helped her onto her bay mare. "You have a week, Ella. If you're not back by then, I'll come looking for you." "We'll be back, don't worry. I know I am in capable hands." Chapter 5. Traveling with Jess was everything she'd hoped for. Not only was he respectful and considerate, Ella found him likable, friendly, and humorous, given to telling amusing stories of his life as a cowhand. In her turn, Ella felt relaxed and comfortable with him, offering up her own confidences. She told him of her husband, Martin, of his death, and how she and Roxy came to be in Plum River as mail-order brides. "When Dan told me about ordering a bride," Jess said as they rode side by side across the prairie, "I thought I might order a nice lady to marry." "What stopped you?" He grinned and shrugged. "I reckon to wait a spell. Marry after I start my own ranch. Town talk says you've begun buying land." "That's right. Have some 300 acres, with what the government is offering me to homestead." "That's not enough to start a ranch?" "It might do. But I plan to expand a bit, then start buying cattle." Ella gazed out at the lush landscape, watching a hawk coast above with spread wings as it searched for unwary prey. Huge jack-rabbits darted away from the sound and smell of their horses, Ella laughing at the size of their ears. Deer and antelope also bolted away as they passed, and Jess pointed to a herd of buffalo on the distant horizon. "It's wonderful here," Ella breathed, closing her eyes. "Almost a paradise." "Right now, it may seem so," Jess said. "But out here the land can turn on you faster than a mad bull. See there?" Jess pointed to a small tan and brown form slithering through the tall grass. "Step on a prairie rattler and you might lose your leg, if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you lose your life. Out here, the storms can bring sweet, gentle rain, or a twister that can rip your house and barn to shreds. Lightning can strike, and set the entire prairie ablaze in a wild fire if it's dry enough." Ella shivered. "I know about the blizzards." He peered into the horizon. "I fear we have a storm headed our way." She glanced at the cloudless blue sky, the blameless horizon. "How do you know?" "I can smell it on the wind. See, when you get close to the land, you can read the signs. The land always talks to those who listen." "So when will this storm hit us?" "Tomorrow, maybe. Tomorrow night for sure." Ella sighed. "Let's hope lightning doesn't set anything on fire." "That is a good hope, ma'am." At dusk, Jess called a halt for the night in a small grove of trees near a tiny stream. Ella collected wood for a fire, keeping a careful watch for snakes, while Jess unsaddled and watered the horses and the mule. After picketing them where they could graze, he unpacked the panniers and set up a small tent. "For you, ma'am," he said with a grin and a bow. Ella boiled water in a small pot over the fire, adding the beans, dried beef, small potatoes and carrots she'd brought. Jess pulled pieces of salted pork from his saddlebags and added them to the stew that quickly began to smell wonderful. Though they had stopped periodically to let the horses rest and graze, as well as to feed themselves, Ella's stomach rumbled audibly. She blushed, and Jess laughed. Darkness fell, and within its folds came the yapping and howling of coyotes. She hesitated in the process of stirring the pot, staring out into the blackness. The moon rose on the eastern horizon, and the stars above gave enough light for her to see somewhat. Out amid the short bushes and cacti, she thought she saw eyes glowing, reflecting the light from their fire. She imagined creatures with fur and fangs drawn by the scent of their dinner attacking the camp. "Easy, Miss Ella." Jess's voice snapped her attention toward him. He'd pulled tin plates, cups and spoons from the mule's panniers and set them down, coming around the fire to sit beside her. His leg brushed hers, his hand settling over her wrist. She glanced up into his dark blue eyes, her heart hammering in her chest. "Them's just coyotes, ma'am," he said, his tone low. "Mostly cowardly critters, not given to attacking adult folks. But they're howling. Just on the trail of some old jackrabbit," he said, smiling. "Maybe looking for an old or weak antelope. Nothin' for you to fret about." She couldn't stop her shudder and knew he felt it. "Are you sure?" she asked him. "Yes, ma'am." He pulled his six-shooter from its holster, brandishing it for her inspection. "Now I got this here Colt that hasn't missed anything it's been aimed at. And that there Remington rifle next to my bedroll yonder can hit any old coyote at 100 yards. You be as safe with me here under God's sky as you would be in your bed back home." Ella ducked her head, smiling. She put her hand over his that yet rested on her wrist. The touch gave her new confidence. "Thank you, Jess." "My pleasure, Miss Ella. Now don't you fret none, but I'm gonna step out and gather a bit more wood. You get scared again, let out a yell, and I'll be back before you can yell twice." "All right." Fearing to let the stew burn, Ella stirred it, adding flour from Jess's sack to thicken it as it cooked. Her stomach growled again, and when the coyotes howled, this time further away, the sound failed to alarm her. Jess returned with an armload of heavy chunks of dead wood. Dumping it next to the fire, he flashed his boyish grin and vanished into the dark for more. The stew tasted as good as it smelled. Ella finished off 2 heaping plates, as Jess demolished 3. Jess insisted on going to the stream to wash the plates and pot, so Ella went into her tent to roll out her bed of blankets. I could get used to this, she thought, humming to herself. Out under the stars with a good man at her side. She wondered absently if Dan would be as comforting and protective as Jess was. She was sitting beside the fire, drinking clear water from the stream, when Jess returned. Yawning, she gazed up at the brilliant stars overhead, thinking she'd never seen them so bright and close. It was almost as if she could reach up her hand and touch them. "Dan is a lucky man," Jess said, sitting down opposite the fire from her. "I must admit I do envy him." Ella blushed, not quite knowing what to say. "I'm not so much," she finally said slowly. "Just a widow from Alabama, a girl like any other." Jess drank water from his cup, and his blue eyes narrowed as he regarded her. "Nope. You are far from ordinary, Miss Ella. Any fool can see you're a treasure to hang onto with both hands. A woman as brave as she is beautiful." Ella tried to laugh, scoffing. "Brave?" I panicked at a coyote howl. Jess shook his head. "A woman who ventured out alone with a stranger to seek her man. That's bravery." His eyes reflecting the firelight mesmerized her. So handsome, so kind, so protective. This was the kind of man she'd dreamed of since she was a little girl. The kind of man she and Roxy giggled over and planned to marry someday. Quite unlike her departed husband, who had held a different sort of charm. And here this man was, in the flesh, ready to shoot a scavenging coyote to protect her. She turned her face to the fire. She was promised to another. She shouldn't be daydreaming about Jess. "I may be promised to Dan, but if we don't get along, I can always refuse to marry him. It's within my rights." Smiling, Ella rose to her feet. "I'm going to bed now, Jess. Good night." "Sweet dreams, Miss Ella." Chapter 6. The next morning held a damp chill that spoke of Jess's promised storm. Ella wrapped a wool cloak around her, as Jess donned a corduroy jacket to ward off the brisk breeze that blew in from the west. They rode through the still bright sunshine, chatting amicably. Ella asked him questions about his service to the Confederacy during the war. In turn, she told him of how her father fought under Stonewall Jackson and how her uncle battled for the Union. Brother against brother. Jess shook his head. Makes us all realize how important peace times can be. My family never owned slaves, Ella said. But my father fought to preserve the Southern way of life. He fought for the right of states to secede from the Union. My father was a small planter in Kentucky, Jess said, his eyes focused over his horse's ears. He emancipated his slaves long before the war started. Said God told him owning another man ain't right. Taught me to believe that, too. So why did you fight? He glanced at her. 'Cause it weren't right for the government to interfere with what the South was doing. As the afternoon wore on, the temperature dropped and the wind picked up. On the horizon, dark thunderheads billowed over the Tetons, glaring ominously down on the travelers. Jess searched for possible shelters as they nudged their horses into a brisk trot. He muttered under his breath as he spotted one possibility after another before discarding them. There, he said, pointing. Ella saw only a hollow under some tall rocks, stunted trees growing over and around them. As he helped her dismount under the overhang, she realized the wind blew over and around her. She felt warmer immediately. The storm is moving fast, Jess explained, unsaddling the horses. I expect heavy rain, maybe hail. Ella unsaddled her mare, dumping the saddle far beneath the overhang as Jess directed. He tethered the animals to the stubby trees as the wind howled overhead. Thunder cracked in the distance. Taking her small tent, Jess draped and tied it over the lowest tree branches, creating a broader shelter that both cut the wind and protected a wider area from the rain. Ella helped him gather firewood, stacking the large pile inside to keep it dry. As the rain lashed down, lightning lit the darkened afternoon and thunder crashed. Jess started a small blaze in the scooped-out fire pit, and Ella huddled as close to it as possible, yet still shivered under her cloak. This time, it was Jess who prepared a quick hot meal of beans and bread, brewing coffee in a pot to help keep them warm as the storm grew in intensity and strength. Sheltered from the howling wind and rain and protected from the lightning, Ella stared fearfully out at the storm even as Jess drew close. He threw a blanket over her shoulders and tucked it around her waist and legs, smiling his encouragement. It's just a lil storm, Miss Ella. Little? Thunder cracked like a cannon shot right overhead. Her mare, used to a barn during storms and unused to pounding rain and stinging hail, lashed her tail, whinnying in distress. She stamped sideways, banging into the mule, who retaliated with an annoyed kick. Frightened by both the storm and the mule, she danced again, pulling at her rope. Jess rose to his feet. Easy, girl, he began, stepping toward the upset horse. Easy, now. He reached for her tether an instant too late. At another crash of thunder, the mare reared in panic. Her rope broke. Macy! Ella screamed as her horse wheeled and bolted. Into the night she ran, vanishing as the wind shrieked like a woman, the rain and hail lashing their fragile shelter. Jess caught Ella when she would have run out, frantic to find her horse. No, Miss Ella, he muttered into her ear. You can't go out there, not now. But Macy. She'll be all right, Jess said, gently pushing her down beside the fire. No, she's scared, she'll keep running, we have to catch her. I promise we will find her, Jess murmured, his hand stroking her hair. In the morning. Come daylight, we will find her. I swear it. Ella let herself be soothed by his hands and his words, resting her head against his strong shoulder as the storm raged. Chapter 7. Ella woke to the sound of water dripping. Groggy, she sat up, the blanket she had wrapped herself in sliding off her shoulder. Looking around for Jess, she didn't see him. With a jolt, she realized his buckskin and the mule were gone. Panic nibbled at the edge of her mind. He wouldn't just up and leave me, would he? Standing, she brushed loose dirt and leaves from her dress and walked out of the shelter. Excess water dripped from the canvas overhead and slid down her neck in cold rivulets. Relieved to see the saddles and gear, the mule's panniers, and Jess's bedrolls still where they left them the night before, Ella stretched and yawned. The morning sunlight felt good, and promised a warm day for traveling. She hoped Jess had found Macy or that the mare had returned in the night. Thinking that perhaps Jess took all three to water, she ventured out of camp and climbed a short hill. The hem of her dress grew damp as she walked through the still wet grass, but her sturdy boots prevented her stockings from getting soaked. Shading her eyes, she gazed out at the prairie. There Jess walked, heading toward her with only 2 animals with him. Her little Macy hadn't come back. How could she go with Jess without a horse? Was she to ride the mule, perched on the panniers? Jess waved as he approached, climbing the slope of the small hill to join her. Rain wiped out most of her tracks, but your mare done headed southeast, he said. Fortunately for us, that's where we need to ride. Ella stroked the buckskin's soft nose. What about me? Should I ride the mule? No, ma'am. I'll put you up behind me on chance here. Won't take us long to catch up to your mare. They quickly ate breakfast and broke camp. Jess mounted his horse, then took his boot from the stirrup. Ella put her foot there, and with the use of Jess's arm climbed up behind him. Sitting on the rump of a horse wasn't very comfortable, but Ella liked having her arms around Jess's waist. Jess smelled pleasantly of leather and wood smoke, with an undercurrent of scent that seemed to be purely him. She felt the hard muscles of his belly under her hands, his broad shoulders hiding her view of what was in front of them. The day proved as warm as its earlier promise, so Ella tied her sunbonnet on to protect her face from the sun's rays. Jess reined in his horse on occasion, studying the ground intently. Though Ella looked hard at the ground, she saw nothing that indicated her horse had passed that way. Jess pointed, grinning at her puzzlement. There, he said, his finger telling her where to look. Half a shoe print. Definitely your girl. What if it's the track of an Indian's horse? Indians don't shoe their ponies, Miss Ella. That print is from a shod horse. Yours. On they rode through the afternoon, with Jess growing more confident that they were closing in on her recalcitrant mare. The hoofprints grew fresher, Jess explained, the further they rode. He assured her the horse was stopping to graze as she wandered, permitting them to catch up. We'll have her by nightfall. However, the next time Jess reined in, it wasn't to inspect tracks. Puzzled, Ella leaned around him to see what had caught his attention. The carcass of a dead cow lay bloated under the sun, flies buzzing in a gruesome swarm around it. A small flock of ravens flew away from the body, croaking in alarm. Ella covered her mouth and nose in an attempt to keep the stench from her nostrils. I need to take a look at this, Miss Ella, Jess said, holding out his arm for her to hold as she slid from Chance's rump. Why? She asked, straightening her skirt. It's just a dead cow. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, dropping his reins and the mule's rope to the ground. Not answering her immediately, he squatted beside the corpse, apparently unmindful of the smell. I think this cow died of screwworm, he said at last. Braving the smell, Ella inched closer. How can you tell? He pointed to a scrape on the cow's leg that even to Ella's untrained eye looked like a minor wound several days old. She cut herself there, see? The blowflies laid their eggs in the wound, then spread to the rest of her. I expect she's been dead maybe a day. In that time, flies couldn't do that much damage if she died without their help. What do we do? Jess stood up, gazing out at the waving, golden prairie. I got to get to Dan, Miss Ella. He needs to know about this. We have to find your mare, so I can get you home. Home? But I want to keep going. He gazed down at her finally, a small frown turning his lips downward. His brow furrowed, and she knew she wouldn't like what he was going to say next. You're slowing me down, Miss Ella. I mean no disrespect, ma'am, but I need to ride hard and fast. I can keep up, she said, her tone desperate. Let's find Macy, and then we can hurry. If you take me home, then that's more time you're not finding Dan. Though she kept it to herself, Ella didn't want to be without Jess. She not only liked his company, she found she liked simply being with him. While she enjoyed being with Curtis, too, this felt different. Curtis was her friend. With Jess, she felt excited. Free, as though on a thrilling adventure. Falling in love with Martin had been like this, she remembered. Could I be falling for Jess? You do have a good point, he admitted. but I'm not much liking it. I still think it'd be best to take you back home. Probably shouldn't have brought you in the first place." He looked pensive and Ella held her breath, willing him to allow her to continue on by his side. He studied her face, and she saw his gaze soften at her pleading look. "All right, then, Miss Ella. We ride on." She wanted to whoop with relief, but she merely nodded, not wanting to give him any reason to rethink his decision. Jess urged his gelding first into a trot, then a rolling canter. She hoped they found her horse quickly, as she knew even a stout horse like Chance couldn't maintain a fast pace for very long bearing two riders. If Dan was still miles and days away, they would need the endurance of both mounts. The sun descended toward the distant mountains in a riot of pinks, purples, with slashes of red and gold. Jess reined Chance into a walk, watching the ground for tracks. A moment later, the gelding raised his head, and his ears pointed forward. He whinnied, a long pealing call. A distant cry answered him. "Well, now," Jess said, gazing into the distance. "Here she comes." Sure enough, the sound of galloping hooves and more whinnies of relief heralded the approach of Ella's mare. The bay, still dragging her rope, cantered up, nickering as she greeted her friends, the gelding and the mule. She didn't like being by her lonesome, Jess said, helping Ella down and dismounting. Untying the panniers on the mule, he unloaded Ella's saddle, the saddle blanket and the bridle from the packs. Ella took up the lead rope and rubbed her mare's nose in relief. "You had me so scared, you silly girl," she said, rubbing the horse's face. "Why would you run away from a simple storm?" "We should ride a bit further," Jess said, saddling the bay. "I expect there's better grazing and water up yonder." Dark had fallen by the time Jess found the site he wanted. Though Ella worried about discovering a prairie rattler by stepping on it, she gathered wood for the fire, lit the kindling with her flint and tinder, and pulled food and pots from the packs. Jess unsaddled the mounts, and took them to water before tethering them to graze. Coyotes yapping in the distance brought only a small shiver down Ella's back before she learned to ignore the sound. A gunshot exploded in the night. Ella jumped, panic leaping up her throat. Frozen in the act of adding beef and beans to the pot, she waited, her senses on high alert. Nothing else happened. She relaxed, thinking that Jess had probably shot a snake. Resuming her cooking, she set out the beans, meat, potatoes and carrots by the fire. As the water boiled, Jess returned with the animals as well as a plump jackrabbit hanging from his hand. "What say we save that there jerky and put this fella into the stew instead?" Ella grinned. "You shot it, you can clean it." Jess rolled his eyes. "Lord, save me from feminine wiles." But he picketed the horses and the mule where they could graze and sat down to quickly skin and gut the rabbit. He cut the meat into chunks and added them to the boiling water as Ella put the beef and beans away. As the rabbit and vegetables cooked, Ella put on coffee to brew on the fire. Jess went to the creek to wash rabbit blood from his hands. "No storms tonight," he said, returning into the firelight. He set his bedroll down. She gazed up at the stars. "Such a beautiful evening. I want to sleep in the open like you. No tent." As they ate the savory rabbit stew, wiping their plates with hunks of bread, Ella couldn't help but notice Jess watching her. He flicked his eyes away every time she caught him at it, obviously pretending he wasn't staring. Ella smiled inwardly. Could he be falling for me? She tried to read his expression without being obvious about it, but his tanned face and blue eyes remained carefully neutral. "Thank you for tracking my horse," she ventured. "I don't know what I'd do without her." "You're right welcome, Miss Ella," he said. "She's a nice lil' mare. Wouldn't want to lose her, neither." As before, Jess took the plates and pots to the creek to wash, not wanting to expose Ella to the risk of rattlers. Ella put more wood on the fire, and tidied the camp, taking time to rub Macy's nose and feed her treats of carrots. Despite the storm and almost losing her horse, Ella relished the rigors of travel, roughing it outdoors on the open plains. With a competent companion like Jess, the danger to her person was minimal, and she learned quickly to adjust to life away from town. Jess returned from the creek, having washed not just the cookpots, but also himself. He'd slicked back his damp hair, and water dripped from his chin. Though Ella found him handsome when clean-shaven, she also liked how he looked rugged and untamed with the beginnings of a beard. Face it, girl, you just enjoy looking at him. Somehow, she doubted Dan Ellison would be as good-looking or as sweet or as kind. She had to face the truth, she was falling for Jess. But were his feelings for her the same? His behavior suggested that maybe he cared for her. Could she, without being forward, find out? Ella sipped her coffee, watching the fire, thinking. If she asked him straight out, he might say no, he wasn't falling for her, and that would fracture her already wounded heart. If he said yes, then what? Rush back to Plum River to get married? But what about Dan? What a muddle. When we, get back to town, she began, tentatively, not looking at him, would you, maybe, take me to a dance or something? Was that too forward? Jess didn't reply, and Ella, her heart thumping, risked a glance at him. He watched the fire, poking the burning logs with a stick. It wouldn't be right, Miss Ella, he replied at last. Why not? He glanced at her. You bein' betrothed to Dan and all. He's a good boss, and I don't be stealin' another man's woman. Ella nodded slightly. Picking up her cup, she stood and walked around the fire. Jess watched her warily, as though fearing he'd angered her. She sat beside him and dared to touch his hand lightly. Jess, please listen to me. I've had doubts about marrying Dan ever since I came to Plum River. He wasn't there to meet me when he should have been. After thinking on it for some time, I have no desire to marry a man I don't know. But you came here for him. I came here to start a new life, she said, hugging her knees as she watched the flickering flames. When Martin died, I lost everything, my husband, my home, nearly my mind. I had nothing. Roxy saved me by bringing me here. We both came as brides, but she had no intention of marrying Curtis. She planned to go home and marry her father's apprentice. Instead, she fell in love. I want that, too. Marry for love? Jess sounded bemused, and poked again at a log, sending up a flurry of sparks. Yes. If Dan isn't someone I could fall in love with, I won't marry him. Your word is your bond. I know. Quite a fix I'm in. She half laughed. Jess took her hand, slowly, as though fearing he'd break it. But marriage is important, I reckon. Marrying someone out of necessity ain't always the right choice. I need to know him before I make my decision, she said, wanting to lean against Jess, but not daring to. If he's not right, I can stay with Roxy and Curtis until I do find the right man. He smiled down at her. Good people, your friends. Always have an option, my pa used to say. She squeezed his hand, feeling her heart swell with emotion, good feelings, happy feelings that she hadn't had for a long time. She had loved Martin with all her heart and missed him sorely. But that didn't mean she couldn't love someone else. Chapter 8. Through the morning and into the afternoon the next day, Ella fretted. Not about her feelings, but rather how long it was taking to find Dan. Curtis had sworn to come for her if she wasn't back in a week, and it had already been 3 days. She worried they were pushing the horses too hard, forcing them into a pace that might possibly break them down. Toward late afternoon, Jess reined in, shading his eyes as he stared intently toward the east. Ella followed his gaze, noticing a faint dust cloud rising on the light breeze. It that Dan? She asked eagerly. No, he replied, his tone calm. Cheyenne warriors. Panic gripped her. Indians. Are they going to kill us? Oh, my goodness, they're going to scalp us, aren't they? Can we run? Jess shook his head and turned his horse toward the cloud. No, ma'am. Them's a hunting party. Better to be agreeable and sociable than hostile. We'll be neighborly and pay them a visit. Nudging Chance to a trot, he led the way as Ella, trembling inside, followed reluctantly. As they drew closer, she saw 3 Cheyenne, feathers in their hair and wearing buckskin trousers, pointing at them. They, too, increased their pace to meet them. They each had a dead antelope tied behind them on their horses' rumps. The trio stared curiously at Ella as Jess made gestures in the air, and spoke haltingly in their own tongue. The warriors answered him, talking at length and gesturing southward. They said Dan and his hands are a day's ride south, Jess explained to her. They wanted to know who you were, and I told them. Ella tried an awkward smile, but the Indians didn't smile back. She wondered if that was a bad thing. Jess untied the half-cured rabbit pelt he'd tied to the panniers to dry in the sun, and offered it, with a pouch of tobacco, to the warriors. Accepting the gifts, one jumped down from his black and white pony. With his knife, he cut a haunch from the antelope, and, speaking his language, offered it to Jess. He and Jess exchanged more words and gestures, then the warrior jumped back on his horse. The three then loped their ponies northward. Jess packed the haunch away. Supper, he said, his tone satisfied. And we'll meet up with Dan tomorrow. How did you learn their language? Listening mostly, he said, tying the laces of the pannier. Dan hired a half-breed a while ago who taught me some. Why didn't they try to kill us? Ella stared nervously toward the north, fearing the Cheyenne would come back with scalping on their minds and knives in their hands. Jess mounted his horse. Being neighborly can solve a host of ills. But, they're savages. Are they? Jess asked, nudging Chance with a touch of his spurs. Seems to me they aim to protect their territory and women and children. If that be a savage, then so am I. Ella rode beside him in silence. Everything she'd been told about the Indians seemed so puzzling. She knew many stories of fights and massacres between the whites arriving from the east and the indigenous people of the land were quite true. But how many of the conflicts were ignited by the invading whites? How many had been ignited by the Indians only trying to protect themselves? Jess's attitude and words gave her much to think about. As the meat roasted on a spit over the fire that evening, wafting delicious smells into the air with the smoke, Ella now knew that Jess's feelings matched hers. Extra solicitous, he performed tasks for her that she had been completing since they began the trip 4 days ago. Again and again, she caught him staring at her as they dined on the delicious antelope, roasted potatoes, and boiled beans, yet this time longing and concern lurked in those blue depths. No stranger to love, she knew what he was thinking. Tomorrow they would meet Dan. But why doesn't he tell me his feelings? Why does he persist in hiding them? She knew the answer before she completed the thought. His honor. In his eyes, Ella belonged to Dan, and Jess would not trespass. If she chose to marry Dan, Jess would stand aside. She shook her head. And here I sit, having been only concerned about myself and how this affects me. Wrapping herself in her blankets beside the fire, Ella lay down, listening to the flames crackle, and the distant hoot of a hunting owl. Jess also set his bedroll down beside the fire, and, to her delight, lay with his head next to hers. Smiling secretly, Ella shut her eyes and slept with Jess within touching distance. Chapter 9. There they are. Ella had no need to shade her eyes to see the immense dust storm a few miles away. The morning dawned cool and cloudy with a hint of rain in the future. Jess assured her there was no vicious storm coming, but rather a mild rainfall. She hoped he was right, for the picture of Macy pitching her off and decamping ruled her mind's eye. Within the hour she would finally meet Dan. Her stomach churned, not with happy anticipation, but with dark dread. How could she meet her intended bridegroom when she loved another man? What would Dan do when he discovered she wanted to marry Jess? Would he shoot Jess down like a mangy dog? Jess was no help, for he'd barely spoken to her all day and had carefully avoided her eyes. Her thoughts squirreled through her mind like a trapped rat, and she felt as though she'd be sick up at any moment. Jess put his horse into a lope. Ella followed as 2 riders broke away from the now visible group of cowboys and mule-drawn wagon. A large herd of spare horses followed with a single cowboy taking up the rear. Announcing himself, Jess whistled sharply and waved his hat in the air. The front rider returned the wave, cantering forward. Ella took a long look at the man she assumed was her fiancé. Dan Ellison rode a dapple gray gelding with a proud head and sweeping charcoal mane and tail. Yet, to Ella's her eyes, the man in the saddle wasn't nearly as good-looking as his mount. Stout and somewhat thick, Dan's hair was curly and dark, as was his full beard. He raked his fingers through it, and his brown eyes flicked between Ella and Jess. "Gentry? What are you doing here? And who is she?" Jess dismounted and assisted Ella from her saddle. "I'm bringing you your intended." Stunned, Dan swept his hat from his head, his jaw slack. "You're Ella Bennett," Ella replied, walking forward. "Pleased to meet you." Dan dismounted and dropped his reins to the ground. Taking her hands, he kissed her cheek. A sweet smile blossomed on his swarthy face. "Ella. Forgive me for not meeting you when you arrived. I had to take the cattle to Denver, and unfortunately, we hit bad weather that forced us to halt several times. Gentry, what are you doing bringing her way out here?" "I asked him to bring me," Ella said before the boss's wrath descended on Jess. "He said no, but I threatened to follow him if he didn't." "Brave girl," Dan said, his tone admiring. "And spunky. Come, let us ride. We can talk along the way." He swung back to his horse, leaving Jess to assist Ella in mounting her bay. Though she much preferred Jess to help her, dismay at Dan's neglect swept through her. Why, he treated her as though she were an afterthought. She collected her reins and waited as the rest of the hands, the herd, and the chuckwagon caught up to them. Riding back the way she and Jess had come, Dan asked her a few questions regarding her trip, then he turned to Jess with queries about the welfare of the ranch. "It's fine, Dan," Jess replied. "But there is a problem. I found a cow half infested with screwworm." Dan's mouth tightened into a grim line. "That's bad. We'll have to check the entire herd," said another cowboy. "That could spread faster than a wildfire." "I know." As Dan and his men made plans to round up the herds grazing over the pastures, Ella reined her mare to the side, outside the group. She earned a few tipped hats and smiles from the hands, yet Dan seemed to have forgotten she was there. She caught Jess's sympathetic gaze, but as Dan busily quizzed him about the dead cow, he couldn't ride at her side. That night as they camped near a small stream, Ella found herself seated on a log beside the fire, unable to help with chores at all. The hands insisted on erecting her tent, gathering wood, cooking and delivering her plate of hot stew and beans to her. Dan sat nearby with his plate in his hands, eating with gusto while asking her a few questions around mouthfuls of food. "When did you get to town?" he asked. 10 weeks ago now." It was the third time she had answered that question. Dan nodded. "So, you're visiting with your sister, then?" "My best friend and her husband." "Oh, yes, that's right." He shoveled more stew into his mouth. Ella found his table manners off-putting, and could only eat her own meal as long as she didn't watch him while she did. Eating outside on the trail was no excuse for ill manners, she told herself. When Dan asked her for the 4th time how she enjoyed her train trip west, she almost threw her plate at him. The moment he popped the cork on a jug of whiskey, took a drink and passed it around, she excused herself and went to her tent. Lying down on her pallet of blankets, she listened to the talk and laughter of the men until Jess's promised rain drove them to seek their own shelters. She lay awake for a long time. Chapter 10. For perhaps an hour the next morning, Dan gave her his full attention as they rode, often leaning out of his saddle to pat her arm or hand. "I have 5,000 acres of prime grazing," he said grandly. "Pretty near 2,000 head of cattle, not counting the 500 head I just sold at market in Denver." He patted the breast pocket of his coat and smiled conspiratorially. "I'll be a major influence in this part of the territory one day. In the very near future, I'll lead the cattlemen here in Wyoming." He winked in her direction, not quite meeting her eyes. "Have the ear of our brand new governor, so I will. Mark my words." Ella listened as he spoke of their marriage, the children she would bear him, and how she would run his household with a fair but firm hand. As he talked, she saw herself cleaning his home, rearing his children, serving him his dinner as he talked of his plans for the ranch and his future. Not their future. His. Nothing in his chatter spoke of love, of romance, of sharing hearts and dreams and growing old together, hand in hand. Deep disappointment filled her heart, and Ella barely glanced up from her hands on her reins as Dan, without excusing himself, turned his gray to ride with his men. She half listened to the talk of blowflies and maggots, spring calving and branding, another cattle drive planned for the summer. What have I done? Tears stung her eyes as she thought of the miles she traveled, the weight she'd endured, and all for a man who had no more affection for her than he would his hound. I've been a fool, she thought bitterly. She recalled the conversations she and Roxy had about the risks of marrying a man whom they knew only in a few letters. Little promise of love, but that was the chance Ella had forced herself to take. To marry a man who didn't love her, for the security of a home and hearth. Was it worth it? Miss Ella? In her misery, she hadn't noticed Jess ride up on his tall buckskin next to her. She tried to smile but knew the effort failed. Hello, Jess. Listen, he's not a bad man, Jess said with a quick glance toward Dan. He's worked hard to build that ranch and make it what it is now. He just gets distracted. Ella let out a short, humorless laugh. Distracted? That's an excellent word. He will make a kind and decent husband to you. And I will be nothing more to him than the woman who puts food on his table when he comes home. Once upon a time, that might have been enough for me. Not anymore. Jess gazed toward the distant hills of the Golden Prairie, a slight frown puckering his brow. His blue eyes narrowed as though she had said something offensive. Ella watched him for a moment, wondering if he'd speak of his feelings, if he did indeed have any for her. When he remained silent, she returned to facing forward, guiding her mare around a spiny cactus and stiff thorny bushes. She had already made her decision. She could not marry Dan. Even if Jess continued to deny what sizzled between them. If I can get over Martin, I can get over Jess, she told herself. After reaching Dan's ranch, she would inform him that she had no intention of marrying him, then go home to Plum River. Meanwhile, she would keep her chin raised high and her spirits up. After all, she was a free woman and could marry whom she chose. Roxy and Curtis ensured that. Don't give up on him. Ella glanced at Jess, incredulous. You want me to marry him? He didn't look at her, but his mouth thinned to a straight line. I want what is right and honorable for all concerned. That's not an answer. It appeared that was the only answer he planned to give. With a quick tip of his hat, he reined Chance around to lope back down the line of riders and the mule-drawn chuckwagon. Ella watched him vanish into the dust cloud before turning forward once again. As she rode several horse lengths behind Dan and the cowboy who always rode with him, the dust seldom engulfed her. That also meant she primarily traveled by herself, alone with her sour mood and thoughts. Jess avoided her during their midday break to eat and rest the horses and mules, leaving Dan to send the cook to her with a plate of beans, bread, and jerked beef. More morose than ever, Ella ate mechanically, hardly tasting the food. She wanted nothing more than to kick Macy into a run and leave these men behind, but the sensible part of her knew she'd never find Plum River on her own. A few hours past their break for lunch, Ella caught the sound of a distant rumble. Thunder? Frowning, she shaded her eyes as she stared west, seeing the dark clouds that heralded one of Jess's storms. Nothing save the sun and a few billowing white clouds met her inspection. Wait. What's that? A cloud on the horizon, not in the sky, swirled dark dust in a maelstrom. The thrumming sound grew louder and now caught the attention of the men. Dan halted his gray, and with the ever-present cowboy beside him, stared at the huge dust storm. What in the blazes, he began. Buffalo, screamed a man from behind Ella. It's a stampede. Oh, dear Lord, Ella moaned, her knuckles white on her reins. The buffalo herd, running at full speed, headed directly toward them. She heard their bellowing over the thunder of their hooves, the lead buffalo likely seeing the fragile humans and horses in their path. She knew they could not stop, nor could they be turned aside. They simply ran too fast and would trample them within moments. Run! Dan yelled, spurring his horse, frantic. Ella loosened her reins and urged Macy into a dead run after him. Dimly, she heard Jess scream her name, but panic had her by the throat. Glancing at the onrushing herd, she despaired not clearing them in time. She whipped Macy with her reins, urging the horse to greater speed, hoping to outrun the leading edge of buffalo. She didn't. While the great herd parted in a vain attempt to go around her, one huge creature slammed into her mare's hindquarters. Macy staggered, trying to gain her footing and keep running. Another struck her shoulder, tearing open a huge gash with its horn. The horse spun about, wildly trying to stay on her feet as Ella clung desperately to the saddle horn. Dust filled Ella's eyes and nose as blind panic blackened her mind. She didn't think, couldn't act. Her entire life had turned into a desperate push for survival. Out of nowhere, Jess seized her reins. "Kick her," he roared over the tumult. Ella obeyed, shoving her heels into the mare's heaving sides. Macy regained her balance, and broke once more into a dead run. The two horses ran side by side in the midst of the herd, flowing along with them, maintaining an even speed. With Jess guiding her horse, Ella hung on, hardly daring to look at the shaggy brown humps and sharp horns all around her. The herd didn't slow, but a thinning within it appeared to the east. With skills likely born from working cattle aboard a strong horse, Jess urged both mounts in that direction. The herd gradually changed course, galloping toward the west, leaving Jess and Ella riding amidst the herd stragglers. As the remaining buffalo followed the leaders, Jess slowed their panting, lathered horses to a trot and finally to a walk. "Are you all right?" he gasped, leaping out of his saddle. Ella couldn't answer. She stared at him as he lifted her down from her bay, shaking and trembling, as he set her on her feet. He brushed her hair from her face, peering anxiously into her eyes. "Ella?" She burst into tears. Jess held her close as she cried, her tears wetting his dusty shirt. She clung to him with desperation, all her fears and panic pouring from her as she wept and shook. She had no idea how long he held her, but his soothing voice kept whispering in her ear, and his strong hand kept stroking her hair. She couldn't let him go. Somewhere deep inside her, she knew she should stop crying, wipe her face and thank him. Instead, she buried her face in his shoulder even as her weeping tapered off. "Damn and blast." Dan's voice finally forced her to move her face from Jess's shoulder and look around. She found Dan still mounted, a coat of dust and sweat turning his brown face gray and his gray horse brown. Wiping her drying tears with her hand, she finally, reluctantly, left Jess's embrace. The chuck wagons overturned, Dan groused, staring back the way they had come. "The horses are scattered." He glanced around and seemed to see Ella for the first time. "Is she all right?" he asked Jess. "She will be." Jess left his arm protectively around her shoulders as Ella straightened her skirts, brushing some of the dust from them. She couldn't trust her voice. How clearly Dan had ignored her safety as the buffalo bore down on them. No thought of her well-being had crossed his mind in that moment. As she stared at him, silent, Dan fidgeted. "I thought you were right behind me, Ella," he said. "Safe." "Sorry, you know." Rather than speak to him, she left the shelter of Jess's arm and went to Macy. The mare's nostrils flared red, sweat streamed down her beautiful face as brown foam covered her neck and chest. Blood oozed from the nasty cut on her shoulder, and she held her right rear hoof off the ground. Jess bent to run his sure hand down the leg. "Just badly strained, I think," he said. "Not broken, but she'll be swollen and sore for a while. She's dead lame for now, though." Still not speaking, Ella stroked Macy's wounded shoulder, noticing the bleeding had stopped. Perhaps Jess's skills might extend to doctoring the wound, perhaps stitching it. "We should just shoot her and have done with it," Dan said, pulling out his rifle from its scabbard. "She'll slow us down." Ella stepped out from behind the horse. Naked fury roared through her. Now, he was going to shoot Macy? Her hands clenched as though feeling her hands around his neck, throttling him slowly. Dan met her eyes and quickly glanced aside. "Don't you dare," Ella gritted. He hemmed a bit, almost hawing, obviously trying to decide if he should behave in a manly fashion and shoot the horse or withdraw with some semblance of dignity. I'll have a hand fetch you a mount, he muttered, reining away. Jess watched him leave with a strange expression on his face. Ella tried to interpret it, then gave up. She continued stroking Macy's long face. Get up on my horse, he said. I'll lead Macy. No, Ella picked up her reins and started walking. I will. Chapter 11. As Jess doctored the wound on Macy's shoulder with a salve, Ella stroked the mare's face, ears, and neck. All around them, Dan's cowhand set up camp for the night, while Dan sat silent on a log, staring into the blazing fire. With ropes tied to their saddle horns, they hoisted the chuck wagon back on its wheels. It sustained minimal damage, and needed only a few slams with a hammer to set boards back in place. The cook immediately set to reordering his cookware and beginning the hot meal they all needed. Four cowboys rounded up the scattered herd of horses, retrieving the mules along with them. As dark settled in the east and the sun set in the west in brilliant glory, Jess nodded to Ella and smiled, wiping his hands clean. She'll need at least a month off, Ella, he said, stroking the mare's salty neck. But she'll heal just fine. She's young and tough. Like you. Ella's returning smile failed utterly. Her mind couldn't or wouldn't let go of Dan's behavior, leaving her alone in the midst of a wild buffalo stampede. She resented him to her bones and longed to vent. But she was better than that, she told herself. Just get home with your dignity intact. That was all she could do. In the morning, I'll pick you out a nice mount, Jess said, watching her face. It'll be slow going, with Macy lammed up, but we should reach Plum River by the day after tomorrow. None too soon, she breathed. She let Jess take her horse to water and graze. She stood with her back to the fire and the camp, watching the sun vanish in a great ball of reds and golds. She felt so tired, exhausted, really. Her tent stood near the chuck wagon, and she wanted nothing more than to crawl inside. But that meant crossing the camp and walking near Dan and his cowboys, who were now settling at the campfire to eat their dinners. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten much that day. Jess startled her by taking her by the arm. Come, Ella. You need to eat. I'm not hungry. If you don't eat, you might get sick, he said, his blue eyes on hers. I won't be having that. Giving in, knowing he was right, Ella permitted him to walk her toward the camp in the growing darkness. His hand, gentle on her arm, felt right, firm and sure. Like a husband, she thought, kindly disposed toward his wife. She stopped herself before she leaned into him, wanting his strength and wanting his arm around her. He's too honorable to step on toes to ask for my hand in marriage. The thought depressed her further, and she almost asked him to escort her to her tent. She wanted to weep again. Besides, he continued. We need to talk to Dan. She stopped dead and pulled her arm from his grip. Never. His brow rose, as did his boyish grin. Come now. I know you want to rip off his head and spit down his throat. Maybe, I'll be giving you that chance. Reluctantly, Ella permitted him to take her arm again. She held herself stiffly, her anger rising at the expectant confrontation where she would, finally, tell Dan exactly what she thought of him. Dan lifted his head at their approach, clearly trying to find a smile for her. Perhaps he thought she had come to forgive him and to bend herself to his role as her future husband. Is the horse well? He asked brightly. She looked better. Gentry, you're a genius with horses, that I know to be sure. Instead of answering, Jess dug into his pocket. Ella focused on her breathing, in and out, so as not to erupt into a tirade against Dan. To her surprise, Jess tossed a small wad of bills into Dan's lap. Dan stared at them in shock. What is this? Ella's train fare, Jess replied, his tone cool. I'm repaying it. But you're a fool, Dan Ellison, to let a treasure like Ella slip away. But your loss is my gain. I intend to marry this here filly, and make her love me as much as I love her. Dan's jaw slackened. Ella's eyes widened with both shock and pleasure. Jess. Jess turned her toward him with his hands on her shoulders. Oblivious of the staring hands and cook, he took her face in both hands and tilted it up. Her eyes met his, unwavering. "I love you, Ella," he said, his tone low yet sure. "I know I ain't much, not yet, anyways. But I mean to have a big ranch by the river with a house and a barn and a loving wife. I promise to be a good and faithful husband to you, if you'll have me. Ella, will you marry me?" For a moment, her heart stopped. She stared into his earnest blue eyes, unable to believe what her senses told her. Jess loved her. He asked her to marry him. Could this be real? "Ella?" he asked. In answer, Ella threw her arms around his neck, crying and laughing. "Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, I'll marry you, my sweet cowboy, I'll marry you 10 times over." As the hands erupted in cheers, Jess nuzzled her nose to hers, smiling into her eyes. "Oh, I reckon just once will do." His arm around her, he tipped his hat to Dan, still sitting, stunned, by what had just transpired. "I reckon it's time to quit your employ, Mr. Ellison. I have a ranch to build and a wife to care for. She's a handful, but I reckon I can hang on." Dan stood, tucking his thumbs into his belt. "Well, sir, I expect you should quit. I reckon I'm not quite husband material, Ella, and I do say I'm sorry. But Gentry here is a good man. I have a thick head, but even I see the love you have for each other." Ella smiled. Though she didn't quite forgive him, not yet, she still found a little mercy in her heart. "Thank you, Dan. I fell in love with Jess right from the first. Forgive me for leading you on." He bowed. "Nothing to forgive, my dear." As Jess led her away into the dark, Ella leaned into him. With her arm around his waist, and his arm over her shoulder, she sighed. "You shouldn't have given him that money." "Why not?" "I reckon it's fair to pay him back for what he paid to bring you here." She chuckled. "So honest and fair-minded is my future husband." His brow rose. "Something wrong with that?" "No," she admitted, grinning. "Nothing at all. Except I paid my train fare to Plum River." Jess laughed. "Then I just gave him money for the horse I planned to take." Ella gave him a hug. "For that amount, you should take 3. "Nah. I'll compromise and take 2. It's only fair." Ella laughed. "Oh, I do love you, Jess Gentry. What an astonishing coincidence. I just happen to love you too, Miss Ella Bennett." The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.